You're listening to Transforming Life Sciences, the Medidata podcast series which explores how technology can accelerate the healthcare revolution. In this podcast, Christian and Dr. Hausfeld will discuss the benefits of running clinical trials abroad, some of the challenges businesses may face in doing so, and what they may need to consider in order to be successful. So very warm welcome to you, Jeffrey and Christian.
Pleasure to be here.
Very glad to be here.
Jeffrey, Christian, we know that global clinical trials are a recent trend. Is this a short-term thing, or is it going to be something that's going to become more popular?
So this is something that has really been a significant advancement for sponsors of clinical trials. Whether it's a rare disease that only occurs in a specified region of the world, or it's an infectious disease that you only can find in a certain location, our ability to go across different countries really increases our patient universe. And when we do that, we can know that we can have the selection criteria that will fill our clinical trials. And really, what do we want as a sponsor? We want to have control of costs, we want to have reliable data, and we want to be able to make sure that we can have patients to fill the trial. So yes, I think that this is going to be a trend that will go on, especially if these countries are giving incentives for us to go to their country and participate in trials in their countries.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. So actually, Medidata is doing clinical trials in more than 130 countries globally already. So I don't think that this is a trend as of today. I think this won't go away. We see this rather increasing. Yeah? And so I'm spending most of my time in Europe, and I see a couple of powerhouses already coming up. So beside the UK, I see lots of innovation centers in Switzerland, in Germany, France, Denmark is increasingly high. We're having lots of biotech companies working out of Israel, the Benelux countries, Southern Europe. So there are various areas where these countries really drive innovation towards making clinical trials more effective, but also being more goal-oriented in terms of achieving what they want to do with them. And so this is what I can confirm. That's definitely the case. There are challenges for this, obviously. There are various regulators that we need to deal with. There are various infrastructures, where we need to handle. But overall, this is something that, from my perspective, won't go away. It will rather increase.
Let's take a look at personalised medicine. We know that personalised medicine is driving the globalisation of clinical trials. But what do we actually mean by personalised medicine, and how can this impact drug development?
So personalized medicine, when I'm talking to clients, to partners, contract research organizations, personalized medicine is basically done because sponsors are more and more working towards rare diseases. And this is coming with a couple of additional challenges, because when you're working in an area of, let's say, stage 2 lung cancer in a very specific area, it's very hard to find the right quality and quantity of patients to look into. So therefore, that's definitely something which brings a certain amount of complexity with. And by expanding the audience, from one region to a more global clinical trial, this gives us more and more opportunities in order to find the right patients, to drive clinical trials more effectively, and to be more successful at the end of the day.
Yeah, so this has been a significant scientific advancement in order to identify drugs that really are specific for certain genotypes. And if we can do that, we can then really target precision medicine that is personalized. But there's a question about how good we are at doing this and whether we should do this. So we call this patient enrichment. And really what you're enriching is the ability to get responders. So you have a lot of exclusionary cautions and exclusionary things that you're saying that you cannot have patients participate in a trial. And the question is whether that really is creating bias in a trial, and whether you should have real world data that gives it to everybody and you see what you get. So it is a controversy. It's not settled yet, but certainly the ability to identify specific people with specific genotypes that can respond to diseases will only allow us to be better and have less inefficient medications and have less costly trials.
Yeah. And I think that globalization is really playing into our hands, because we actually can really benefit from all the technology which is there today. So let's say 5 or 10 years back, we didn't have cloud computing, we didn't have artificial intelligence, machine learning. So these are all tools and areas where we can now dig into in order to be more global and in order to serve patients in a much better way.
Christian, you mentioned earlier about some of the challenges that we face with globalizing clinical trials. We've certainly established the benefits of it, but what obstacles can the industry face with this?
I think there are various obstacles that I see so far. So first, we are working for a good reason and for a good cause in a very regulatory environment. So therefore, everything that we are doing is observed and monitored by a regulator because we're actually working with patients. So therefore, there's a good reason for this, and regulation in this context is necessary. Handling and managing various regulators, from the FDA to the EMA, we will have a very specific situation in Europe towards Brexit, when the United Kingdom won't be part of the European Union, therefore won't be part or covered by the European Medicines Agency. So covering and managing various kind of regulators is definitely something which will be a challenge for us. And we see this more and more upcoming because trials are becoming more and more globalized, even if we are all working under a common good clinical practice. I think that's something where we can all agree on is something where we are globally working under. But I think handling various regulators will be a challenge for us. And I think we see this already today. Besides this, I think when you are entering emerging markets, don't expect that the infrastructure is there. So don't expect that you've got a high-speed internet all over the place. So when you're working in countries which are growing also from an infrastructure perspective, but this can be a challenge. So don't expect that you've got the same infrastructure as in the United States, as in Germany, as in France. So this is definitely something that if you want to go global with clinical trials, think about this early enough and ask technology vendors like Medidata, what are the pitfalls and what can be avoided.
So, Christian, there are certain common assets that both the sponsor and the clinical research organization have in common. And those I can boil down into money, people, technology, data, and time. Each of those represents potential obstacles, but each of those also presents potential opportunities. So what we have to do is look at every one of those assets as a common ground and say, where do I spend my most precious asset, which is time, in securing the money, securing the people, and making sure that I'm managing the technology and the data so I will have a successful outcome to my clinical trial. So what we have to do is not only look at trial design, but the selection of the CRO, the logistics of getting things from one place to another may be different in different countries. The standards and ethics in one country may be different than another. All of those have to be taken into account and managed, and you hope that there is the infrastructure in both a research community and a scientific community that can handle the data that you're creating and make it usable for presentation to a regulatory body.
Given these challenges, what needs to be done? It looks like this trend is here to stay. So what does the industry need to do to change or improve?
Well, the first thing that needs to be done is you have to take your time in selecting both the site and the clinical research organization that you're going to perform this function for you. And it does take a lot of time to do that. So no, this is not something that can be rushed into. This is one of the most important things that a young pharmaceutical biotech company will ever do, especially if you're dealing with phase 1 trials and phase 1 data. If you fail here, you are not going to move forward. So this is one of those key bottleneck and key decision points that you have to pay extra special attention to. So you have to decide who's going to manage the process. How can you avoid amendments afterwards? Because that's very costly. That can cost you $500,000 to $1 million just in amendments to your clinical trial and design. And are there enough patients in the pool there to fill the required number of patients in your study protocol? So all those things have to be taken into consideration when you're doing global trials.
I think what we really can see is we are starting to benefit from new innovation, from new technologies, and our clients and partners are already massively making use of this. So when you think about that, we are utilizing cloud computing, we're setting up scientific control groups, for instance, we're setting up virtual trials, which are massively supporting global and more international trials. We're making use of mobile technology, so it's much easier to gather the data. So this is all coming into play. And we're actually benefiting from the experiences that we have done over the past, let's say, 2 years. And now our clients obviously are benefiting from this because they can learn from each other. And I think that the collaboration between, and you mentioned this, between partners, sponsors, physicians, nurses, data managers, staying focused on this because global trials are more complex than regional trials or local trials. I think this will be something which will be a key factor for success.
Dr. Hausfeld, in the past you've talked about the vetting process of clinical trials. Could you tell us a little bit more about the practical sides of this?
Well, it's very hard when you're trying to choose a CRO that's a world away and you really have no direct experience in dealing with them. So you have to go to external sources. So you can go to the local Better Business Bureau, the local Department of Commerce, you can go to previous clients and get those recommendations. And you also should be checking on key opinion leaders and whether they've been published in the region, because that also adds credence and credibility to your trials. So when I like to think of what's the mission that could be agreed upon is near flawless execution based on a culture of collaborative goal setting and shared learnings. So near flawless, because if you expect flawless, you're going to be disappointed. Transparency, because it's dependent on accountability and trust, something that has to be earned over a period of time. And the collaborative goals, you have to agree that you're going to have a certain goal in mind with your CRO. And the shared learnings is that if you make a mistake, learn from it. Don't repeat it over and over again.
Let's hone in on the UK specifically for a moment. Christian, what impact do you see Brexit having on the globalisation of clinical trials?
I think first of all, what we can say is the UK will remain to be a very important factor within the life science industry because all the skills, all the knowledge, all the players who are there, they won't go away. And so that's something that we will definitely see in the near or long-term future. The UK will remain to be an important part of our industry. There will be changes, obviously. We are seeing that companies are a bit of afraid in terms of losing talent, and that's something where they're actually and actively working on in keeping the talent within the countries. We will remain to have fantastic organizations like Cancer Research UK, for instance, who will remain to be an important part of the cancer research community. But looking into the talent area is definitely something which will be a challenge. We're seeing the move of the European Medicines Agency from London towards Amsterdam. That's a big move. And that's a big move also in terms of, that we are seeing highly skilled people moving from one country to another and from one location to another. That's something which will be interesting to observe. We don't know how the overall regulatory environment will look like in the near future. Obviously, we're having the EMA on the one hand side and we're having the MHRA on the other side, and the MHRA has done tons of work for the EMA quite recently, so therefore that's something which will be challenging to see. I personally see this more from a patient perspective, because the patient doesn't care about Brexit or any macroeconomic changes. He's actually interested in that pharma companies and CROs are successfully working on getting the research project done, and I think something where we as an industry should continuously look into.
So it's interesting that the NHS is a repository of a significant amount of data, and they can become a research organization themselves if they leverage that data and help sponsors design trials and protocols that would be beneficial. So that's one potential outcome that would be a positive outcome of Brexit. I think that for sponsors, what we look for is standardization and harmonization of everything from the protocol design and study design through pharmacovigilance. If we can have that set in stone so that we're not jumping from one country to another with different standards and different expectations from the regulatory agencies, because all that will do will be increase the time that it takes to get your drug to market and increase the cost. So the standardization and harmonization throughout that area and throughout the world, and when we're talking about global trials, is what we are looking for.
We've talked about the benefits, we've talked about some of the challenges. So to close this off, what advice would you give to those who are thinking about conducting a clinical trial on a global scale?
The first thing is try to establish a personal relationship. It is difficult sometimes, but when you can sit next to someone and have an eye-to-eye conversation with them, it's much easier than talking a world away or dealing with emails and never having developed that personal relationship. And you vet them as you would an employee. So you talk to them as if you're hiring them, because you are hiring all of them as your representative to do this work. So why do people fail? Why do physicians fail in this? Why do PhDs fail? Why do business people fail? It's because they tend not to adopt an executive temperament. So an executive temperament is when you make the environment right for bees to make honey. So if you're arrogant, if you're micromanaging, if you're naive, or if you have a very poor emotional intelligence quotient, you probably will not get along with your CRO, and that will lead to disharmony. But if you can provide the culture where you are identifying their strengths and building upon their strengths, then you have a very good chance of having a successful outcome.
And I think from a technology standpoint, I think we're actually already seeing the advantages of technology which wasn't there just a couple of years ago. So when I take a look around and talk to clients, they massively use mobile health technologies. The first clients are starting to set up synthetic control groups, which is also from an ethical standpoint a big advantage towards clinical trials. And what we are also seeing is that they are really setting up virtual studies. So we're actually running with one of our clients the largest virtual study with more than 15,000 patients rolled into this clinical trial who actually don't have to come to the hospital all the time. So they are treated at home. That's something that you cannot do for all treatments, obviously, but there are certain areas where you can massively make use of technology, set up virtual trials, make use of mobile technologies, and I think that's something which is fascinating and which is very much exciting for me when I take a look into the future and what quantum leaps are in front of us.
Thank you to Christian and Jeffrey for coming in today. What's really stood out in this conversation is globalisation is a trend which is only set to increase, facing a tough regulatory environment and a complex political landscape. Collaboration, accountability, trust and shared learnings will be key to success.